Good morning. I wanted to apologize because I never really considered algorithms. I did consider algorithms uh, putting things in a person's path that enables pride, and then therefore they could accuse, and not really considering themselves as an accuser, as opposed to someone who wanted to see something or learn something maybe they might have missed. And I know you're gonna say, I know you're gonna say, and I'll keep trying my best to share with you as much as I can. But there is just so much over time that it can't all be put into. And I often try to put too much in at one time, and it does get it does kind of get full. So again, I apologize for that, and I don't really care about algorithms, and I know them and they know me. And that's not pride or arrogance. I know them because they have pushed themselves on me. And I don't necessarily push back. It just kind of over time dissolves. It's like a curtain. You can tear through the curtain when you tear through the curtain, you realize that it's just an image projected on a screen. Okay, so I don't know if I can cover this all in a very short amount of time. So I'm probably gonna compress some of it. And I know I typed some of it in earlier. It's many, many videos back where I kind of shared about myself, but I'll try to explain it a little bit better, at least best I can. And so you can see what my experience was. All right. And I'm probably gonna forget something. I probably will forget something. All right. So back in my 20s, it was kind of like, well, I was back in my, I was like, I'm no different than anybody else. I'm affected. I am, and was affected by the same things. I didn't quite go to the extreme of, that a lot of us did, but I did dip into that well a little bit, here and there. But I mean, I didn't go out like and genocide a whole bunch of people. God, no. But I did stumble quite often. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I got this feeling, it was really strange. Like it was just strange. And when I was younger, my parents used to take us to church. And, we used to go, well, we used to. And then I just didn't change. It's just I haven't been there in a while. And I can share many things about that, uh, where I even didn't necessarily I didn't like some of the things some of the women said, because I thought they were unfair because I was gonna make my own judgment, and I don't know really I think I understand, and I'll try to explain a little bit later, but let me kinda keep going 'cause I'm not gonna get this all in one video unless you can sit and snooze for about an hour. It's like the Tree channel, you listen to it and you're just like, "Oh god, I'm completely rested, but I don't remember a thing that was said." Alright, and my throat is kinda hoarse, it's the allergy season here. I don't really have allergies, well, I guess I do maybe, I don't know, but anyways, um, so I got this feeling of dread, like impending doom. And, this wasn't something somebody put on me. It wasn't something that, it's like, yeah, that job didn't work out, or, oh, yeah, I walked out on that job. Nothing like that. It was just, I don't know what it was. And it was inside of me. So this was something that felt like a burn within my core. And, I grew up, my mom, she was a nurse, so she studied psychology. And yeah, when I was really young, we used to sit and she would always ask me how to pronounce words. She would always ask me like, because words had a certain flow and a certain balance when you say them. So, if it sounded, usually the English language doesn't sound awkward. So it's probably more of a poetic flow of the word, rhythmic flow rather than just awkwardness. So we had psychology, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family where I could ask any question, and I literally mean any question. And I'm thankful for that. Of course, my dad oftentimes sat there, didn't say anything, like was somehow was supposed to figure it out through osmosis. I gotta love my dad. He's been gone for a while, but man, oh man, like I'm like, well, that was good talking to you, Dad. That's great. But I did enjoy my time with him. But I had this great feeling of dread, like I could not express it. And it concerned my parents. And I was actually kind of talking, I don't know, like for some reason, I would grab the Bible and I literally would repeat this one single verse. And it wasn't, actually, I believe in, I want to say Ezekiel, but it was also in Thessalonians. And I'm sure those that read that know exactly what I'm talking about. And when I did, I felt something inside me change. And I was so afraid. I was like, oh my God, because normally when people told me things and I heard what they said, it made me feel a certain way. It's like, okay, this was meant for me. And then all of a sudden I'm reading this, I'm thinking, oh my God, is this me? And I remember being so upset. Like I mean, I would constantly go back to it. Now my mom told me a bit later that one time I'll be able to read that passage again and it won't bother me. And she was correct. Um, but then it's like when every time I read it, it was the same. It's like something dropped on me. And I don't know how to explain how that feels because that wasn't the only time I felt that. One time it was in church. So I didn't know what that was. And so my mom's idea was to, let's go get this guy tested. Like, let's take Megan to the hospital and see if see if his head spins around 3 times. Because if it does, and his eyes pop up 2 cherries or whatever, we're betting on the horse. So, I did, and and I actually went to some counseling back then, and I listened to the things they said, and it was actually I heard it from 2 different counselors at that time, and one was kind of interesting because he was talking more about almost metaphorical, but it's like he had an idea, but not a strength. And then there were those that was like, oh yeah, here man, let's you take this, you'll feel better. I did not. So, anyways, I had that feeling, and it did not go away. So, my mom didn't understand it. So, at that time, someone approached me, and they had gone to a church, and they were like, "Well, it's because you don't believe in God. You don't, or not. I don't know if you don't believe in. You're not saved." And I remember that, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I don't know about. I can't." And it was so funny because I'm like, "I can't tell you if I am." And it was funny because he goes, "Well, then you're not saved." And I said, "No, I can't tell you that I am because I am not God. God has that final say. I don't. So if I was to say I am, and I guarantee that because someone said that they died for me, and they died because to bring that message, you are going to die because the world just the people who it was meant for could not understand it." Okay? So that was why death came, physical death had to come. That was the price of delivering that message. So I said, I can't. And I don't, I don't think they ever bought that. But it was true. I was not, and even then, I was not going to say something that, I knew could not be true because as, I grew up in the church. Well, when I was younger, my parents took me to the Church of Christ. And there are funny stories about, how when the preacher started my mom used to tell me that when the preacher was slamming his fist, on the podium, I kinda looked up at him. I instantly locked eyes with him and then just stuck out my tongue. Yeah, I have no idea why. I must have been a brat. God, I don't know. But anyways, back in my early 30s. So I didn't know where to go or what to do. So he told his preacher. So his preacher came over to the house. And it's funny. It really is. It's kind of a funny story. And it is something that's like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. So he comes over to the house, and now he's not the same religion as well, he doesn't. My mom used to say everybody believes in the same God, but I saw it as they believe in different images. So they believe in a God, but the image they see is different. Where some might, yeah, sorry about that, my screen blanks out. Where some might say, uh, you know, I interpret this, kind of a thing. Um, so anyways, so anyways, um, so we're there, and he pulls up in this Cadillac. It's a used Cadillac, and he wanted me to kneel down in front of my mom. And I don't know, this seems like some kind of invisible mental or spiritual war that goes on between people just to prove each other's side. Well, my mom was not going to do that. That's not going to happen. And she didn't chastise me or beat me or, you know, run me down with the belt, I mean, she did that when I was a kid, but she had her moments. But anyways, but it was just only it was very, very rare, like, it was incredibly rare. But anyway, and trust me, I probably deserved a lot more. But anyways, so, and I'm thinking, "Well, this is weird," 'cause I was looking at it in a different way, and I'm like, What are we doing? Like, what are we proving?" Because if God knows everything, he already knows I'm thinking, and he already knows I'm about ready to ask, "What is this? What's going on here?" And, he's already gonna know that. So, there's nowhere I can hide. So, um, when I stood up, the first thing I asked him is, "Why do you drive a Cadillac?" And I always got myself in trouble. I was like, "Why do you drive a Cadillac?" And it was funny because his response was this. He goes, "Well, I can drive any car I want." And I'm like, "Okay, that tells me all I need to know." So, but it went further. So he says, "Okay, so here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna come to church, but I need you to meet me down in some kind of office before you go up to I guess to tell everybody or me to stand you before everybody." And I'm thinking, Why do I need to go? Like, why is this like an interview?" Because it didn't make any sense. Like I didn't like when I read the Bible back then. It was different. It was. I don't know, it's strange. It's like I didn't get anything out of what I read. Like, I could remember it, but I couldn't really understand what it meant, and that didn't happen until later, which unfortunately, this looking at this timestamp, this video here is gonna be a nightmare. So, yeah, I gotta apologize in advance. Okay. So if you make it far if I had to li if you make it farther than me, listening to myself talk, then you are stronger than I am. Okay, so anyway, so I met down in the office and he tried to explain, like Jesus and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, and he goes, then he goes, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go upstairs. You're going to stand in front of a bunch of people and blah, blah, blah." And I'm thinking, well, why not just do it? Don't tell me about it. Just do it. If I'm sitting in the audience, just call out my name. And I would be shy, back then, but I'd be like, oh God, really? So, anyways, so I said, okay. So I'm sitting there and he goes, "I'm going to give out this invitation and you come up." Now, the problem with that is the people that saw me doing that of my own accord when actually I was instructed to do that. So I went up there and I felt this thing come down on me and then bounce off 3 times. It's like it came down on me, and then it's almost like an auto fan kicks on, and it blows the smoke out of the room. But, I mean, this is something you can feel. It's not like a clouded mind. It's not like all of a sudden I have doubt. You literally feel a compression on your insides, and then it goes away, and I'm like, "Okay, what is that?" You know? And, of course, people would say, "Well, that was God." And so, I had that happen that was, like, 3 times. And so anyways, I sung in the choir with them. I think they had, like, a piano at that time. I sung in the choir with them, and, that was kinda cool, and they wanted me to teach in what, that time they called children's church. And, but the problem with that is they wanted me to gather them, but then they wanted to immediately teach them what they wanted to teach them. Like, they couldn't gather them themselves. So they wanted me to gather them. And, of course, I went out door to door and I'd read like little Bible verses and things like that. and, I kinda, did all that stuff. But I didn't it was this was mostly to, like, children or something, and, I went to this one house, and, oh, man, it was a poor little child. They had plastic. They took in foster children, and they had plastic all over their furniture, and, I was sitting there, and, man, she was, like, really slamming this on this child, and I'm thinking, you know, how can you how can you show love when somebody's beating you over the head at the same time? That makes no sense. So eventually, I even tried going to college at one time, and I actually wound up writing my understanding and philosophies down, which was pretty kind of not distorted, but it was confusing at the time. It was too many ideas were flooding in at one time, and I tried to compress them all in kind of like a few, like in a, I guess to what you might call a secret society, they might go, oh yeah, look at this guy, he's sending letters as from us. That wasn't a letter, that was actually what I turned in as a term paper, and I and I can tell you that big red F that I got stamped on the front, but, it is what it is. So, that didn't last, and, so anyways, I told mom, about that thing bouncing off of me. So, she goes back in her room, and I can feel something happening. There, it's almost like, there's this I know people call it channels, they call it all kinds of things. But I could feel that there was actually a conversation happening. And next thing I'm doing a Bible study with Church of Christ people. And some of them were pretty adamant about, and I'm not talking about, what they believe. It's adamant about their own stories. Like, well, I divorced this person and it's because of this reason, and I'm like, okay, because all of a sudden it's like, what? Do I got to live up to their expectations? Now? I don't understand. And why are you telling me this? But it wasn't being mean or rude, and there's no arrogance in that. It confused me because I believe when people have something to say, there's a reason, and oftentimes you have to listen beneath what they say to understand what they mean. And I learned that, but I didn't learn that I kinda had that, but I didn't really know how to apply it. That wasn't until, coming up here a little bit later. So anyways, God, this is probably gonna be an hour long. So anyways, so I went to, the what they called, like, Bible study, and we met over at, someone's house, and we were sitting there talking, and, we had some fun moments when we tried to do that little optical illusion thing because they couldn't really cross their eyes to see what it was, and then I could almost feel them drawing on me to do it, and I'm thinking, "Yeah," of course, when you do that, there's a lot of things flood in. And yeah, that wasn't gonna work, but we had a lot of fun doing that, and, so anyways, down in the basement, we went down in the basement one time, and I can't remember his name, and, he was really kind of, pushing it, not pushing it, but he was really trying to hammer this home, and, I guess when you look back, you could say, "Well, if someone said, they don't come to me unless my father brings them, then you can try to bait and hook me all you want, but you're not gonna get the real thing. So if you bait and hook me and I get stuck at that moment of bait and hook and have pride in myself because you see in me a value and therefore I use that value against you, then, like, you I'm not gonna grow past that, and that's what I'm gonna be stuck with." So, and I remember he talked about, a eunuch. Oh, well, actually, before that, one of my classmates was there, and, really nice woman, really nice lady, and she said, that she kinda said out loud that I didn't really understand social ordering, and I'm thinking, "Well, okay, hang on a second. If you're talking about behavior, then if you order things a certain way, then you're locking people out of learning. So that meant that you locked me out potentially. And of course, I don't like that idea because if there's something I do, it needs to be on me. If I do something wrong, that's on me. If I do something right, that is on me. That is why I always said, but that's why I learned to say that, you can't be free to do the right thing unless you're free to do the wrong thing because that's really a choice you make. So he was reading something. He read the story about the eunuch, how the eunuch said, the eunuch where I think one of the apostles had preached Christ, and then, the eunuch said, "Okay, well, here's water. What's gonna stop, what prevents me from being baptized?" And, he said, "Nothing. If you believe," all he said was nothing. "If you believe, you can." So that's what he did. And it said he went merrily on his way. So that's the example he read to me. And I thought, okay. So he went merrily on his way. So there's not a bunch of people hounding you constantly trying to justify themselves on something brand new that's going to be created or something new that's created. He just went happy on his way. Okay, sounds cool. I, so I went there and, it was funny because he was so cool. I believe he was the one that said, "Hang on a second, I gotta put on my hip waders." So, it was like and he told me it was his fishing outfit, and he had a really good sense of humor. But that wasn't of course, that was just a kind of a dunking in the water, and I'd already done that once before when I went to the first church. And I remember the person who mentioned I come to his church, when I tried to explain that to him at a later time, when it bounced and I said that thing bounced off of me, his reply was, maybe you weren't ready. It wasn't okay, what was that? Because later on I asked that person, when you're in the middle of your congregation, do they always say things that's right? And he said, no. And I'm like, well, then why don't you stand up and tell them that it's wrong? Of course, he was much, much older than I am. And yeah, I said, why don't you just stand up and tell them it's wrong? I mean, if you believe that strongly, and I know it sounds harsh because the people, I know the people who he was a dad for. And trust me, they didn't like that. But I mean, it was an honest question. So, anyways, then I'm sitting down. I think I don't remember getting dried off. Like I don't even remember. I know I wasn't wet, so I think I must have brought a change of clothes or something. Gosh, that's and anyways, but we were sitting there, we were sitting on the pew, and I had read before, and I had read from different parts of the Old Testament because I noticed that some parts really stood out to me, and some parts didn't. And I kind of mentioned those parts before in the kind of like previous video. Some parts really, really stood out, and it seemed different. Like I don't know how to explain it, but it's like some words were inset and some words were outset. So, you read it and you're like, yeah, 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 you can fall asleep while reading it, but whatever this was in my face. And that's what I used to read. And most of it was Old Testament. It wasn't necessarily New Testament. And of course, being in Church of Christ, they oftentimes read that wrong. They kind of read it wrong. So, anyways, there was one person didn't like it, and I really liked him, and I don't hold any grudges. But he was the one that always talked about. He would get up there right behind me when it was his turn and talk about history. All this stuff is just history. It's all about history. It's all about. And I was like, okay, but interestingly enough, they really wanted to hear what I was saying. And, of course, there were those just like, oh, this is really going to be a falling away. Mr. Hurt, you're leading the pack. Am I? Am I? Is that what I'm doing? Because it sounds like something's leading me. So whether it's up or down or left or right, that's not for me to say. What does it say? You do the will of your father. So, and he puts that on you and you do what you do. So, and he is the final judge. So that's kind of like how I looked at it. This is going to be like a timer, like every 20 minutes, it's going to be like, blink out, blink out. But anyways, so I'm sitting there, and this is kind of like what I tried to describe, but there was no way I could explain this in just text. It can't be done. This is too much. So I'm sitting there, and they're sitting behind me, and I felt a burning pressure. I mean, it blotted out everything. Like there was nothing on my mind. I didn't feel like running, but I'm thinking, you know what? I'm gonna sit here in this, and but it didn't consume me. And because what I learned a few minutes later, what they believe was that the gospel was passed down through a laying on of hands. They saw, because that's what they read in the Bible. Because they try to follow, what the apostles say. Oftentimes, and I really hate to say this, but sometimes they forget mercy. Sometimes they do. especially for those that are on the outside, even though it said you should be the same to those on the outside as well as the inside, especially those on the inside. Um, because how are they gonna know, you know? Um, but anyways, and I'm thinking, God. So that's when I heard them say behind me, you know, now, let's wait and see what happens. So, because a lot of them wanted me to be one of those people who would stand up and kind of like preach, I guess. And I remember telling a guy at work, his name was Charles actually. And I asked him, I said, because he asked me one time about public speaking. He goes, Mike, you ever read anything about public speaking? And I'm like, no. If you'd have catch me in my 20s, I would have run from any. I did terrible in that respect. And I said, no. And I said, but let me ask you this: do people learn more by a handful coming to a pulpit, or do people learn more by somebody taking the pulpit out in the world? You take that you do they come to hear a word, only a handful come to hear it, but if you take that word out to the street, and I mean, not in a way where, we fail to examine ourselves, but in a way that, is something that, because I always when I was at work, and I'll tell you some stories about that too, because it was so funny. People at work would always go, "Yeah, yeah, that's Mike. That's something Mike would say." I'll give you a quick example, and I need to get back to my original story. There was a guy I was in there's a whole bunch of people around, right? And they always wanted to clue into what I was gonna say, like, "Oh, this guy's full of crud, so let's just kinda smirk him off." But anyways, this dude, he was a temporary guy, and he came in and he was gonna go into the military, but I remember talking to him and, and I could tell he was something he wanted to ask. And this is just kinda like how it flows out of me. So, he was talking about something, but I knew and he didn't really he knew I could tell he was asking something. So, I said, "Okay." I said, "I think I know what you're asking." I said, "But let me, I said, "Let me, oh, here's what okay, I'm trying to think, don't wanna put the cart before the horse. So, I think I know what you're asking." And so I asked him. I said, "I will tell you," and I know this is gonna sound like, "Oh, Swami, my Swami," but I believe that, I believe someone once said I believe Jesus once said that there'll come a time when you won't have to ask in my name. Father will just give it to you because he knows you love me. Well, anyways, I said, "Okay, I'll tell you when I said, I'll tell you when you're gonna die, but first you have to answer first I have to answer my question. When are you going to live?" And it was funny because, yeah, that group would say, "Yeah, that's pretty reciprocal logic, that kinda makes sense." Of course it does, but that doesn't make it any less true. So, anyways, back to my story. So, I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, that is when it's like I felt I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it's like, a window opens, and there's, like, all of these voices behind it. And none of them were like, "Oh, yeah, you do this and I'll make you money. I'll make you this, I'll put this on your head. I'll do this." No, 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 no. Nothing like that because I wouldn't have wanted that anyways. It actually they were almost I could almost get impressions of what was done to them. Constant accusations of everything they ever do wrong. And I remember it really did it really made me cry because it wasn't you could say, "Well, that's empathy, and yes, that's empathic personality." You can say those things because I'm sure that's part of the equation. But to actually see that and to feel that, and I remember saying to myself, almost as if I was saying to them, "I won't do that to you. I won't do that to you." And I meant it. So, of course, that's kind of like how all that was. And then when I went to read the Bible again, it was completely different. The best way I could describe that, it's like, um, take the small book, eat the small book, because it's all the same message. It's if you ever read it, it's the same message throughout the whole book. And it isn't like, "Yeah, I'm gonna wipe you out," kind of a thing. I mean, it's all about And I understand because if you went from a garden to where you had to till your own bread, there will be violence. There's going to be those things. So the question is, do you go to where the people are? That's kind of like the question. I guess maybe that's what, he meant when he said, if you do things for those who do things for you, what reward do you have? You know, you do things for those who can't do for themselves, which kind of reminded me. I used to, and then after, I started thinking, wait, 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 what is that saying? God helps those that helps themselves. Well, if they can help themselves, why do they need God? What's the purpose of having God if you can do it all yourself? That made no sense. So it's interesting how everything changes. Um, and I'll take time. I don't want to put this past 30 minutes, but I'll take time to kind of take you on through it. And even after that, even after all that, people still try to push me in things, and I still challenge the pushing, and there was kind of a falling out of a lot of things, and I had nothing to do with it. And things like that just kind of follow a person, and you notice it after time. So you kind of hope it doesn't happen, and you do everything you can to make sure that it doesn't happen, but it always does. Um, but yeah, that's and and even after that point, I was gonna say I still had ups and downs, still did my own thing, and actually got reminded that's not a good idea. And, yeah, it's but it was fun. It's fun. It's really because I always told people when it talks about fear, fear your father. A child doesn't fear their dad. They respect him because they know that he can do something they can't. And you could call that fear, but it's not fear. It's actually love because how many times does a child do something wrong and he still is right there in front? I mean, a child is still right there in front of his parent, right there in front of his dad, still open like a book, and his dad. So it's kind of in a way the message is delivered. And I'll kind of end this one on this kind of a note. I was at the YMCA and everybody used to come and talk to me. God, it was like, and I loved it. Like I've met people from like so many different walks of life, and I'll tell you all about that. I'll share that with you when I have when I get another chance. But I was at the Y, and this guy came over to talk to me, and, he goes and this is what he said, like, I went there to swim, and I mean, there were times when I was sitting in the water for 5 hours talking, and I didn't even do a single lap, and it didn't bother me, but I'm thinking, "God, I'm waterlogged. I have to get out of here." And, but, you stay as long as you can. But anyways, this guy, he was like, "Oh, I noticed people," and he goes, "I noticed a lot of people were talking to you." And then after he talked to me for a little bit, he goes, "Oh, now I know why people were talking to you. Now I understand." So what I wanted to share with you, when our conversation first started, I said, imagine a person as a mercy seat, and the judge sits upon that mercy seat. And I said, "That's kind of like what you're doing. You're talking through that door and you're asking something. And in between that, you have a translator. The translator is from you forward. So that way they can understand. Of course, technically, I guess God would understand anyways, but that's kind of like how I explained it. And just to end on another quick note, we were in the lunchroom one time. God, there were so many people in there, and it got really quiet because they were having like a cookout or something. And this lady, she was, I always talk to her, and she came in one time. She goes, "God, Mike, I can feel, the air just feels heavy. There's something wrong." And I said, "Well, root up." Root up. And she didn't really go, to the same, church I did, but I shared everything exactly the same no matter where they were from. I like, root up. And it was something simple and something clean. It just didn't have any agenda to it. But later on, we were in the lunchroom, we had a cookout, and she was there, and she was telling me something, and I thought, and everybody thought this was something I did in front of everybody, which is kind of funny when I look back. I couldn't help myself. Like, I just can't help it. I just can't help it. So, anyways, and but it wasn't like I couldn't help it because I was being sarcastic. It's just it was simply the truth. She said, "Hey, Mike, I want you to pray for my friend. They're really having a bad time." And and believe me, the majority of the people in that lunchroom were not of the same church I'm from. They weren't of the same thing. I don't want to say thing. That's wrong, but they didn't always. They kind of believed in their own ways and kept God on the back burner. Where I was from, it was kind of like, hey, look, God said this. That's how it is. Period. There's no negotiation. So, anyways, I told her, I said, you just did. It was funny because they did not understand what that was. And I was literally saying, if it's not, and I didn't tell them this, but if it's written where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am among them. So if you told me, you told what was there with me. So as I said, as I told her, I said, you already did. But what's funny is they thought I was talking about myself. And, some thought I was actually talking about me, and then they did that whole routine, like, "Well, who the heck's this guy think he is?" And I said, "Well, I can tell you who this guy thinks he is. He's a guy that's gotta walk back out on this floor in about 20 minutes and start getting back to work. That's what kinda guy this is." But yeah, that was kinda that. So, yeah, I wanted to share that because oftentimes when they push forward like that, they are seen. And what they did was try to take it higher up the chain. Except, it's like, "Okay, we saw this of you. This struck me. I'm taking it to my boss." And I'm like, "Look, I don't know how it works, but, I've got one too. So you can call him what you will." Um, and it's funny because this is not bragging or anything, but I was like, "You know what?" Yeah, there was a person one time at work, and I was like, "You know what? You've blasted me enough. Here, let me introduce you. You can go argue with him, because I don't know what else to say. So here, I will show you right where he is, and you take that to his doorstep." And it sounded like self-righteousness, but it really wasn't. I was literally saying, I'm telling you what I believe I'm being told. And it wasn't anything about, and I'll probably get in trouble for it, because I didn't like beat everybody over a stick because that's not what I read. That bruised reed it's not something that I thought I should do. And I even told them there's another way. I said, what you guys try to do it by force, and I'm telling you, there is another way. And I did tell them that. All right. Well, I'm gonna cut this loose because this is like 40 minutes long. So um I look forward to encouragement you have to offer and encouragement for everybody else. And I can tell you that if if everyone is encouraged by what you say, then I can tell you that those people who they are with, even though there's not a lot of them, they are encouraged themselves. Not so much by what they've done, but the fact that other people have hope, and that is something that is felt. And I do thank you for that. Okay, I do have to hop. So, all right, I'll chat with you later. And if you made it to the end of this, great. If not, you will probably never hear me say that. All right, I hope you have a good evening.